And so like my filter is just very low. And I think that's very typical for most artists. Like you're probably listening to this podcast, you're probably like that as well. But that's also our superpower because we're getting in so much of these like various inspiration, various like just data. We then formulate that down into our own songs. So like lyrically, it's a lot of that is just like conversations that we overheard from like strangers that we don't even know, or even, media that we consume, or sounds that aren't even necessarily musical, but it's like it hit us in a certain way that we then put that into our own music through some sort of like weird transformation that we somehow came up with. And so that's kind of like the artist superpower, is that we take all of this stuff and we process it down into something that other people can then understand. All right, so welcome to the prolific Super Producer Podcast.
There it is.
I finally got it right the first time instead of trying a couple times. So welcome to the podcast where we are helping you pursue music professionally, be an ultimate super producer. So a super producer is somebody who does all the things. They write the music, they record the music, they mix the music, they master the music. Everything is you because you're that incredible. So that is what we're trying to help you become in this podcast. And ultimately, whatever your goals are in music, like we're trying to help you get there because we are a little bit further along than probably most of you in our own careers inside of music. And so we just want to be able to turn around, give you a helping hand up, teach you our experience, what's worked for us, and ultimately help you along your own journey in music. So if any of that resonates with you, then stick around because we're going to be talking about how to find your sound as an artist today, because we all want to have that unique sound that sets us apart from everybody else. And ultimately, we don't want to be like everybody else because everybody else isn't you. And so you want to be authentic, you want to be yourself in your music, and ultimately that's what we're going to be teaching you today in this episode. All right, so if you're listening to this podcast, then you're probably already producing and mixing your own music. And if you're unable to get that professional sheen or quality or vibe for your songs, then I want to let you in on a little secret. Most mixers are trying to compensate their lack of professional mixes by getting more plugins, by using more advanced tips or tricks or techniques in their mixes, or relying on buying more professional gear in order to compensate for their lack of quality mixes. But in reality, most mixers' core problem is actually mixing subjectively or approaching mixing from just a creative mindset entirely. Obviously, mixing is still a somewhat of a creative skill. It's actually far more objective than most people realize. Because if we think about it, everyone agrees on what a professional mix actually is. If that weren't the case, then it would be an entirely subjective field. But in reality, mixing is actually incredibly objective because everyone agrees on what a pro song sounds like. And so mixing objectively can actually help you avoid being your own worst enemy inside of your mixes and ultimately allow you to just check all of the boxes that a professional mix should check, and then your mix will sound objectively professional. And so if you're mixing your own music and you're motivated to actually learn the objective skill of mixing, and if you want to ensure that your music sounds pro, then I would love to help you out by teaching you the 5 objective standards that everybody is judging your mix by, and how you can use objective mixing to solve those 5 problems inside of your mix, and then also how to do all of that in under 3 hours per song without pro gear, premium plugins, or utilizing templates or presets. If this is something that piques your interest, then go to theobjectivemix.com to check out my brand new book. Right now, you can pre-order that book for only $5, and it'll teach you those 5 objective standards, how to solve them in your mix, my entire mixing workflow, and all of the breakthrough moments that I've had in my mixes over the last 16 years of mixing. So if you're interested in picking that up, again, it's only $5, and you can get that theobjectivemix.com. There should be a link right below this video if you're watching on YouTube. So with that, let's get back to the podcast. Nathan, where do we start in trying to find our voice as artists?
Yes, 100%. Okay, so to find your sound as an artist, right? We all want that, and it starts though. It's important to understand where it starts. It starts with your inspiration, right? Because when we're getting into music and we're starting to come up, we're starting to just something happened, right? Long time ago. It's just like the origin story for like a Marvel or something, like before Spider-Man was bit by the spider, right? Like something happened to you to move you from becoming just a listener of music, a consumer of music, to a creator, right? Like something you crossed the line. You wanted to get to the other side. And in that, what probably brought you to that other side is just like, conglomeration of a whole bunch of sounds, a whole bunch of artists, or maybe it was one artist that used your favorite. And like all of a sudden you were like, I want to do that too. I think I could do that too. So what transitions you to creating is typically another artist. That's just kind of like ground level. Not all the time, but I feel like most of the time, so we hear music, we take it in, and it moves us to want to create and do our own thing too. So the reality is, you kind of sound like what brought you over. You kind of sound like what inspires you to start creating, because that's what inspires you. And I think that's awesome. That's an incredible starting point. A great zone to be in the beginning, to just get your reps in and get practice and like be writing songs and be just learning chords and like learning song structure. It's awesome. That's how we all start. But the trouble is, to get to our own sound, there's part of the process where we kind of make another transition. So if at first we were from just listening to music, right? Then an artist or a band or a collection of songs brought us to creating. We've been emulating those to get to our own sound. You kind of have to make another transition, and that transition is going away from emulating your inspirations and leaning into just what you come up with naturally. And now the cool kind of spooky, I think, beautiful part of this is like all that stuff, all of what made you who you were and what made you come over to the side of creating music is still in you. And so I think your sound at its core is the conglomeration of all these different sounds that you've taken in and all these different things that you like. It's like, it's so cool because maybe your drum sound kind of emulates this group over here, but your vocal, the way you sing and perform, is kind of like this thing over here. But then the thing that you do with your instruments, like over your music, you do a lot of synth stuff. Oh, that sounds like this. And you like slowly start to package together you slowly start to package together yourself. And so what do you think about that, Tyson, like making that jump from like not emulating, you go from emulating who you're inspired by to not emulating them anymore, and then finding inspiration with, inside yourself and trusting what you're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my, the people I look up to in the industry who's like, massive, is Ryan Tedder. So Ryan Tedder is the front man to One Republic. He's written so many number one hits. You can't even count them. He is an incredible individual in terms of his creative production and his just output, frankly, at such a high level too. And so I think he's a great example of what it takes to, or what like success looks like in the music industry, in even multiple different paths, because he was successful with his band, but he's also successful as a songwriter too, which is a completely different path than just being in a band. So but with that, he gave a specific piece of advice on like a YouTube video or something that I watched, and it's just stuck with me ever since. And so I wanted to share that with you. It's that through life, you're walking through, as an artist, you're just constantly picking things up, which is why I think that a lot of musicians tend to have like some sort of like ADD, ADHD, like some sort of like of that, like just irregular like mental activity, I should say. I don't know if that's a good way of putting it, but because we're like constantly bringing stuff in though, and we have a worse filter than most other people. Like if we're in a busy restaurant, for example, and I'm like trying to have dinner with my wife, if it's loud, like I will not be able to truly be dialed in that conversation, because I'm gonna be like thinking about like what the table next to us is like talking about, and like what the TV is doing, and if there's a screen, like I'm gone. And so like my filter is just very low, and I think that's very typical for most artists. Like you're probably listening to this podcast, you're probably like that as well. But that's also our superpower, because we're getting in so much of these like various inspiration, various like just data. We then formulate that down into our own songs. So like lyrically, it's a lot of that is just like conversations that we overheard from like strangers that we don't even know, or even, media that we consume, or sounds that aren't even necessarily musical, but it's like it hit us in a certain way that we then put that into our own music through some sort of like weird transformation that we somehow came up with. And so that's kind of like the artist superpower, is like we take all of this stuff and we process it down into something that other people can then understand. And the more human that is, like the base level is like we're communicating emotion through human emotion that other people can resonate with. And like the actual process of that is incredible, which is why all of us are fascinated with music, right? Especially those who make it. And at the end of the day, though, that's your goal, though, is to take all of your inspirations and formulate that into something new. We don't want to emulate our inspirations, as Nathan already kind of mentioned. Like, we don't want to just like straight up like do a cover song and like that is my art. It's like, it's not quite your art. Right?
Yeah.
It could be a good exercise and it could be fun and it can, be a good promotional material or something like that.
Yes.
But it's not your art. You can't really truly claim it as that. But so another quote that I like that I want to add in here is by Oscar Wilde. You probably have heard it. It's so applicable. It's be yourself. Everybody else is already taken.
Oof.
Right. Like if you're trying to be somebody else, that's inauthentic to yourself, to you. Even though they might be a huge inspiration, it's like they're only a tiny sliver of what makes you you.
Yeah.
And another example that I want to throw out here is one from my own life, is that I produced an EP and I wrote a song called Life. I don't even want you to look it up because it's embarrassing, but I was trying to be somebody else. I was trying to emulate a very specific band, which I will not name, when I was writing that song and producing that song. And it led me to make terrible decisions on that song. I'm almost embarrassed to admit this. I was rapping on that song.
Dude,
I am not a rapper, and I never claimed to be a rapper.
Yeah.
And I have no clue what brought me to the point of like, this is a good idea. I am a white dude from Idaho. I have no business in even anywhere close to rapping on my songs. I love rap, which I love like listening to it. I can really appreciate it. Some of my favorite artists are rappers.
Yeah.
But I should not be doing it. So anyway, that is the level though of just terrible decisions that you could end up with. You could be like Tyson and start rapping on your songs when you're not a rapper because you're trying to follow your inspirations so much. Don't be that way. Instead, take inspiration from them, but don't take emulation from them.
Yes. And I guess at least, hey, there was a silver lining, like you did it, and now you know, oh, I'm not supposed to rap. It's like you have that evidence right there.
Yeah, so if anybody does end up finding that song, you're going to realize that there's no rapping in that song anymore because I took it out when I remixed it. I recorded some sort of like other vocal part over that point, and because I was just so embarrassed. I'm still embarrassed that I ever had that, and it's kind of like I'm the butt of jokes still to this day from anybody who heard that song,
dude.
So just be careful because those things do follow you as well. I obviously I laugh about it now, but I'm still like there's still that cringe factor that I even think about when I listen to that song, even though the part isn't even there anymore. So. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's too good. Yeah, I think that like I just think it's a really good point of what you're saying. So to move away, I'm thinking tactically. For me, I can speak to my experience of like when I was trying to actually write my own stuff, I stopped listening so much. I don't know if maybe that's not for everybody, but for me, if I'm trying to get into a headspace where like, okay, I'm really trying to like pull from within, so to speak, it's like, I'm just not listening. I stopped listening to my favorite bands. I stopped listening to the top whatever. I just like took a little bit of an insulated season to really focus on what's there and flesh out like just, me, myself, and like the software or the instrument and my voice. And you're just, I think that's how the process begins. And I don't think you have to go super extreme to like cut out consumption of music or something like that. It is interesting though, like a lot of people who are doing music full time as an artist or something, it's kind of fascinating to hear a lot of them don't listen to too much music. It's kind of, but again, I know there's people who do. So like you can go either way, but I do think it's worth, having periods of time where you're on purpose not trying to make a song like something anymore, like where you're just starting from scratch. And if that leads you to rap, hey, okay, then whatever. To me, I'm like, hey, try it. You don't necessarily have to drop it and put it out, right? But like try things and experiment things. And what are your kind of like tendencies. Like, what do you notice? Where do you start to lean with how you craft a melody or with the lyrics you write or whatever? And I think it's really, how do you find your sound as an artist? You just commit to the process of continuing to find it. I think, you know what I mean? Like, you just, it's kind of like, in a way, an ever evolving thing. Like, I think you can absolutely land on some traits that kind of have a signature sound of like the kind of mood that your tracks usually are, the kind of sounds that you usually have, the kind of structure you might have in place, typically the kind of way that you sing or things you talk about. You know, like there's certain bands that definitely have specific, you know, things that they talk about. So like, I think you can have, you know, pillars like that, so to speak, but I think your sound is kind of this thing that can kind of always be, it's kind of always in process, you know? So I think that's part of it, is maybe don't think of it as a destination, you know, but just think of it as something that you're in the pursuit of, and you're just in process, and you're in the journey of continuing to do that. Because honestly, let's be real, if you sit down and make something and like you say, oh, that's not really me, it's like, well, like, it kind of is, because you just made it. Like, that is you. That is, you just made it. Like, that's you. It came out, man. And it, you know, like, and you don't have to release it, you don't have to promote it, but tuck it on a hard drive if you want to, but like, that was you for a second, good or bad, you know what I mean? So I think it's that, just committing to that process. What do you think about that, Tyson? Like, do you think is it really ever something you arrive at?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation. And I also, there's kind of a side note in there of like, don't compare your unfinished projects or your demos to other people's curated, you know, discography, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if I do a demo, I don't want to compare that to, say, I don't know, name a famous artist, like their discography, because like, obviously that's already curated, it's produced, it's finalized version, first of all, but then also it's like, they're only producing the, you know, their top 5% of the songs that they write. Like, they already have curated that for you in advance. And so it's like, if I'm judging my 95% of what I do against their 5%, it's not going to be a fair comparison. So just a side note there, like, be careful of like being too hard on yourself in that regard. Obviously, try to produce the best stuff you can, and that comparison can be helpful sometimes, but it can also be harmful if it discourages you from actually producing music. So just a quick note there. But the other thing that I wanted to add is that, a quick story. First of all, my dad gave me some parenting advice at one point, and he says, you should raise kids like you raise your dogs. And so his philosophy is this: he lets the dog do whatever they want, or his kids, I guess in this case. I could do whatever I wanted until I crossed the line. Until I crossed that line, then all of a sudden I knew there was a boundary there, and he would come down hard on me. Like that was the reality, right?
Yeah.
In love, of course.
Yeah.
But that's how he trained his dogs, his kids. He's very firm philosophy on that. And this is kind of how you find your own voice as an artist too. And kind of using my example of like, I was rapping on songs but I really shouldn't have. That was kind of a line for me of like, okay, I did this thing, and first of all, it didn't really quite feel authentic when I did it. And then secondly, it didn't have very good response when I did it. And so now I know I shouldn't do that. So while I, kind of regret trying to make that into a song that I produced and pushed, do that in your demos, do that in private, and understands like, okay, like, yeah, I put this out. It doesn't quite encapsulate me, and it doesn't really work for me, but I'm glad I tried it because now I know where that boundary is. Yeah. And the difficult part, as Nathan is talking about, that boundary can move. Like that boundary isn't always there. Like if I really wanted to, I could practice rapping and I could get really good at rapping, and then I could rap in my songs. Like if I really truly felt like that was going to be the best representation of me in my songs, I could do that. However, I don't really want to do that, and it just is obviously not part of my voice today, creatively. And so I think it's a process of experimentation. Do all of the things. Do like write a metal song, write a country song. Try vocal, like try screaming if you want to. Like try yelling in your songs. Try whatever like technique that you can possibly think of. Go ahead and try it and see how it turns out. Most of it will be terrible. Some of it will be gold. And that's what you're sifting through, right? You just want to get through enough like experimentation to find those little golden nuggets that's like, yes, this is me. So that's just a more practical piece of advice that I have for you in trying to discover your own voice is experiment as much as you can in private. Just please don't release it with you rapping if you're like me.
I love that. There's a saying that came to mind as you were talking, which is crap is the best fertilizer. So like if you just keep creating, keep like making whatever it is. Okay, this wasn't that good. This wasn't whatever. But it will, like Tyson said, you will have things that sprout up and start to grow. But it's because you committed to just creating so much and experimenting and trying things, and that's just the process, and that's the process everybody goes through. I mean, you have your favorite artist you look up to. I bet if you were able to grab coffee with them and you ask them this question, I think they're probably going to say, "Oh man, you should see how many things I have on my hard drive," or "You should see how many songs that didn't make the album," or it's like because they're committed to that process. That's just kind of how it goes. And I think I wanted to touch on part of this because especially, you're listening here and you're developing the skill sets. You're developing all the skill sets from songwriting to recording to mixing to mastering, like you're doing everything, like super producer, like Tyson described at the top of the episode. You kind of need to be careful. I've just speaking from personal experience, like you need to be careful with what you're doing in your career because especially if you commit to this and you develop these skills, you're developing scarce skills, I believe. Like you're developing skills that not everybody, there's a lot of people, sure, but you're developing stuff that's still percentage-wise, like the rest of the world. Not a lot of people can, believe it or not, not a lot of people can properly record a vocal or properly produce a song or have the ability to listen to a sketch you made and like program it out. Like you're developing really good skills that could serve you in other capacities. And that's for me in my career, I've gone the undercover route of, sync licensing, custom projects for brands, sports teams, stuff like that. And so like what ended up happening to me for a season is I was using those skills, but I was creating for other people. I was creating visions for other people. And I did so much of that and how that kind of works if you don't know is you get a breakdown. You get like an email, right, from an agency or something. And it's like, hey, we're looking for a song that it's like pretty detailed that has, it's like this BPM, this kind of singing, this kind of vocal performance, these kind of lyrics that use these specific words in this time frame with these kind of instruments. I mean, it's crazy. You know what I mean? So like in that breakdown, if this is an example of a route that you can choose in music. If that's all you're creating, is you're always executing on what someone else wants and what someone else is telling you to do, while a total service and a great way that you can make a living, it can have a negative side effect if you're not also kind of watering your fertilizer over here. Like, if you're not watering that or giving yourself the ability to create for yourself, if you're always creating for other people, you can start to pour from an empty cup. And that's totally what happened to me. Like in the last 18 months or something, it was like I made over 100 songs. None of them were for me. None of them are streaming right now on Spotify. They're all undercover for projects, for people, for other visions that people had that I brought to life. And I felt drained. I was telling Tyson this a little bit ago. I was like, yeah, okay, I made a lot of songs, like way to go. But wow, the whole time I was kind of neglecting my own sound, my own stuff. And that it can be draining. It can be a draining thing. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that really quick when it comes to finding your sound is like you can kind of lose it for a second if you're constantly thrown back and forth and if you're only using your skills for like other people, which I think is great. And if that's what you want to do, crush it, do it. I would just advise, hey, don't do what I did, which was not make one for you too. Like make one for them for the project, but then make one for you too, so you can continue to hone that down. Yeah. So I don't, and I think there's pros and cons to that too. Like Tyson and I were talking, like in the midst of that, making stuff for other people, that's actually still good practice because it kind of like what Tyson was saying, how he like veered off into rapping for a second. I was making kinds of songs that like I would never have naturally made just sitting down to create for myself. So he was reminding me, like, being a good fellow creative, like, dude, like, you still grew from all of that because I was exposed to a whole bunch of different sounds and a whole bunch of different breakdowns and stuff that I could then take into my own songs for my own sounds. There's pros and cons to both, but you just kind of have to be aware of, okay, how do you find your sound? It's kind of something you got to commit to, I believe. It's something that you can't let go for too long because it could be kind of painful getting back into it. It's like, getting out of the game for a little bit and then, or not working out for a while and then you do your first workout. You're probably pretty sore, but you did it and it's fine. You're going to be okay. It's just that initial like reintroduction can be a little tough. So I don't know, Tyson, if you had any thoughts about that.
And I would also say just like, it's a great way to stretch yourself. If you get in a rut is to work with somebody else or to work for somebody else.
Yeah.
Because that will expand your horizons of what you're doing musically, because they're going to have a different creative vision than you generally do, and then they're going to request things that you've never done before or don't do very often, and then that's going to force you to grow as a producer to be able to fulfill those desires. And then it's going to give you more ammunition when you come back to write your own music. And so I don't want to discourage anybody from working for other people and obviously earning money that way too, if that's somewhat of your goal, right?
Yeah.
Like I started producing well before I started releasing my own music, and taking it more seriously because it was easier to monetize. It was easier for me to make a living that way than it was for me to start trying to create my own music and build a fan base and all of that stuff. So, I'm still in the process. As of this airing of this episode, I haven't even launched my new music yet, because I'm still like working in the background, trying to refine it, trying to get all of my photos together and music videos and all of that stuff before I ever like actually launch. And so, even to this day, I'm still not quite to the artist level that I had ever thought I would be 10 years ago.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm so grateful that I went through all of the other projects that I have to this point. And it's not that I ever really truly neglected my own music. So I can't really quite identify with the whole burnout of like working for other people, because I always was writing songs for myself. There was obviously some breaks, a couple months that I didn't write anything, but I was still always doing something for myself of this would be a really cool project, and I'd kind of dabble in it. And so it kind of filled that creative urge that I had. But ultimately I didn't make meaningful progress until very recently, when I decided intentionally okay, now I'm going to actually create music for myself. But that's kind of a different conversation. The main thing I want you to take away is those additional projects that you take on, whether that's as a songwriter, whether that's as a producer, whether it's at a mixing or mastering engineer, those things still help you move you towards your goal skill wise. And that skill cannot be understated on how important that is to develop for your own music, especially if you're going the super producer route where you're doing everything yourself. You need to be able to develop every single one of those skills across the entire spectrum to then be able to produce your own music at that, high quality producer level, because ultimately all of our learning comes through iterative practice. If we don't have that iterative practice, so we don't have songs that we're working on all the time going through the whole process, we're not going to actually get to the skill to be good enough to produce our stuff, our own personal stuff at a pro level, to then ultimately be at the level that we want to as artists, get the fan base, and be treated as professionals in the industry by others rather than just ourselves.
Love it. And I think too, like we were talking about how, finding your sound is it's a journey, right? It's not like it's not really a destination. So there's the reality of evolving, right? I know this to be true in in bands that I like, that I liked, goodness, over a decade ago, when they were starting, and the sounds they were creating, the headspaces they were in. It's just not the same as it is now, because as humans we evolve and our life changes and things come and go and all this kind of stuff, and it just influences how the songs that people are writing. So I know my favorite artists don't sound the same today as they did 10 years ago, and I think it's just the same with everybody. And so I love this idea of projects and moments. Would you mind breaking that down, Tyson? Because we were talking about that, and that just resonated so much when it comes to evolving and worrying about, does this still sound like me, or should I stay sounding this way? This was a really helpful kind of framework.
So I was listening to the Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast a long time ago, and I don't remember most of that podcast, to be honest. I think he's still going, actually.
Let's go.
A.L. Levy is still making his podcast, but it was early on in the podcast, and somebody had said, I don't remember who, but somebody had said that they weren't a fan of bands or artists. They were a fan of moments. And I never really thought about this, but after I kind of dwelled on it a little bit, it really made a lot of sense to me, because being a fan of these projects, these moments that magic happen, because everybody is constantly evolving throughout our life. We're either, we're growing emotionally, or we're being, we're reversing emotionally, right? Like there's always like this sliding scale of all of our skills, all of our emotions. Like sometimes some seasons I might be like really angry, and some seasons I might be really depressed, and some seasons I'm going to be just really overjoyed. Like there's all these different seasons. And so sometimes if you get a group of people together, they create some magic that cannot be replicated because they all had like a certain specific life experience up to that point, and they had certain skills up to that point. And if you get a band all together at that point in time with the right producer, with the right mixing engineer and the mastering engineer, then they just like create this magic that will never be able to be replicated again.
Yes.
And that is what I'm talking about here, is because this magic happens at certain seasons of your life because you're evolving. If you ever try to stop evolving as an artist, then all of a sudden you might be missing out on magic that's going to happen in the future. And that magic changes over time. Like maybe you hit some magic moment when you were 17, and then you haven't really had a successful project since then. But that doesn't mean that you might not hit that magic again when you're, 30. Yes. So it's very possible to hit these magic moments multiple times, and ultimately that's why a lot of people are fans of like certain singles or certain albums, but they don't really appreciate the rest of that band's catalog. And it's because of this idea of the magic moment happened in this one project for this one listener. And obviously people are going to resonate with different things based on where they're also at in their journey. Like if I just went through a breakup for example, like I am going to probably listen to a lot more like dark, depressing, sad songs because I'm resonating with those things. Yes. Versus if I'm really happy, I might not want to listen to those dark and depressing songs anymore. And so, we're always, as humans, we're constantly moving. So I'm going to write different songs. I'm going to produce in different ways based on my skill, my emotion, and my mind state, and my mindset, and my state of mind. There we go. In that moment.
Huge. And I think too, like as he was explaining that, I was like, oh my goodness, that's such a good thing. And then even taking that a step beyond like a listener is for you as an artist, you are right. You're evolving. Like you're in different headspaces at different times, and songs just come together at a certain time because of what influenced you to create it in that moment. However that came up, and then as you go along, it's the same thing's going to happen with other things. That's the beauty of it. And so what if you freed yourself from needing to have a certain sound that's always replicated in all of your tracks? What if you freed yourself to just create projects and create moments? Because I don't know, because you're still you. Again, like I said, if you made this thing and you don't really like it, well, you made it. Like, you know what I mean? Like that came from you. So to just focus on, where you're at right now and how you want to write and how you're being authentic to you is what makes you you. Like that is your sound. It's the whole cheesy cliche thing of everyone has a different fingerprint, and like the Oscar Wilde quote, be yourself. Everyone else has already taken like, hey, that's kind of the unlock. And like, it's a little bit of a Yoda Jedi answer, Gandalf, Dumbledore, do what, take this, figure it out, Harry Potter. It's like, hey, how to find your sound as an artist, be yourself. And it's like, but what does that mean? And it's like, it takes time, but that's really it. And I know that like a firsthand example of this is, if I may be so bold to utter the very phrase that many musicians say in their life, but my band got back together. And we've been a band for a while, and we've just kind of like been off and on, but we're back, and it's been so much fun. And we're going through songs that we made 6 years ago. So we just released a single that was created 6 years ago, and the vocals were recorded 6 years ago. The instrumentation, the production was done 6 years ago, and we were opening that track up, and we were tempted to kind of mess with it a little bit. But thankfully, very quickly, I was like, no, like we should just let it be. Just let it be, because of the very thing we're talking about. It was a project in a moment. This song it was so unique, and it was like its own thing. And we just were like, if we tamper with what we were doing 6 years ago, even if right now you could argue we have more technique, we have more know-how, I could polish it a little better, we didn't want to do that. So I didn't break out any of the stuff that I know how to do now. We just did the best we could with what it was and forced ourselves to create it from what it was right there, and then just let it be, because it still hit us the same way that it hit us back then. And so it's like, it's kind of a wild thing. That was just such a visceral example of, whoa, this was like 6 years ago. I still resonate with this feeling because it was from me. It was authentic. I remember the headspace I was in when making this. but I don't want to mess with it. I think, yeah, it would probably sound different if I made the song now, but I don't want to mess with the mojo. Like, it's its own thing. And because it was its own thing, informed by its own circumstances, that's what made it special. That would kind of be my encouragement, is like, yeah, you know, finding your sound as an artist is, I think, focus on, just be authentic to who you are right now. Where are you right now? And what's the story you're trying to tell? And what do you want to write about? And maybe that's the thing to focus on, instead of getting caught up in, oh, I need to make sure I use this specific drum kit. This is my snare forever, you know, or like, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a good conversation that's there.
I actually have a contrarian view to this.
Oh yeah? Let's go.
So I'm gonna give people another option here. Okay. Hear me out. So you wrote that song 6 years ago in a certain headspace, at a certain life experience,
yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. What if you could create a meta magical moment by collaborating with yourself from 6 years ago? So you have different life experience today that you then could add and accentuate what you were trying to say then. Then you could actually, in creatively, like lyrically, melodically, all of that stuff could then be accentuated. It's not you're rewriting the whole song. It's all of a sudden now I'm going to add a little bit of flavor of, you know, what I am now. And so, because it's like almost two different people collaborating remotely through
it's like
time.
you're featuring on your own track.
Exactly. And so that's I mean, honestly, that's really what you could view it as. And so I wouldn't necessarily say you need to maintain the magic of the moment, because you don't necessarily know if that moment was magical all the time. And so I probably lean too far on the other side of the spectrum, where I'm like, magic, whatever. Like, that's just, you know, like, there's objective, like, analytical reasons why this song is awesome. Like, that's kind of more my like vibe, and more like where I've come to through my own experience. Yeah. But at the same time, like, I also can't explain certain things, and so I do recognize that there is like this other, you know,
this other thing
that you can't measure,
you can't quantize.
Yeah, exactly. And so I want to be able to like be a little bit balanced on both sides, but I'm just gonna say that just because you did something a certain way back when, and you want to release that song, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't touch it again.
Oh, and totally.
Sometimes,
and I think
sometimes it could be great, and sometimes it could, you know, it could backfire on you.
It could backfire on you, yeah. And I think maybe it's a track by track thing. You know, like for that song in particular, we were like, nope, we're just not even going to do it. And then the latest one that we did was the same thing. It was written 3 years ago, but I did a feature on it, basically, like what we were just saying. Oh, we cracked it open, changed some things. I recorded a second verse, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's what was needed for that song. So that's a good point. I mean, yeah, it is like case by case dependent. Yeah, for all of my fellow feelers out there that want the stars to align, you don't just have to make a blanket statement of, no, we never touch anything that was, you know, you don't need to go that far. Maybe sometimes, actually, but maybe sometimes not.
This brings up an interesting idea, interesting concept. I want somebody to do this. If you're in the audience here listening to this podcast, I want you to do this and then report back to me in 6 years when it's done. Hear me out. What I want to do is basically write a book. And so when you're thinking about a book, right, there's different chapters. So let's say there's 4 chapters in a book, then each chapter could be like a portion of somebody's life, right? If it's an autobiography or a biography, like, chapter 1 is like you being born, chapter 2 is like, you know, teenage years or whatever, right? Whatever that person did in their life, it could be, you know, interesting or not. But take that concept of like a creative project, and so like, you know, write a song today, and then in a year from now, and then don't touch it, a year from now, open up that project again and rewrite it with your current life experience, but taking the initial inspiration from a year ago, and then set that aside. Next year, do the same exact thing, right? Like for a couple years, then like refine this song and just like add verses, add like, you know, detail, like whatever you want to do with this song at that point in time, but still taking the inspiration that you had from that initial spark. And so what this does is it essentially creates a collaborative project with yourself over time. And so we're different people each year, and then therefore you are able to collaborate with a version of yourself from a year or two ago. And so I think this concept is interesting. I just came up with it, but if anybody tries it, let me know, because I really want to hear the final project and the final result, because it could be a fascinating discovery. And also, nobody does this. And so if you did this, then all of a sudden you have so much to talk about, so much content to make, and ultimately people are going to be amazed. Like, you waited 3 years to release a song that you wrote, and it's gonna everybody's gonna be like, oh, this guy's incredible.
This guy's a genius.
Incredible. And then all of a sudden everybody's gonna be listening to your song, even if it's not even very good. So marketing is all about being remarkable, right? It's if somebody's going to remark upon something, that is free marketing. So lean into
seriously.
that. Anyway,
dude,
getting into a
Tyson's
whole
giving away some game right now. Yeah.
But with that, I want to hand it back over to Nathan, because if you end up in this scenario where you're just being too creative and you can't seem to ever actually gain any ground, Nathan's got a free guide for you.
Yes, I feel targeted with that last remark, but it's because it's true. I've been this person before. Like, no, I've just I really struggled to finish songs and have leaned too creative. And believe it or not, I do believe that's a thing. Like, been too creative, and I just kept myself caught up. I would always start things, not finish it. Start something, oh, that sounds cool, and stop, close down the project. It's like I couldn't get past the start. I could get past the starting line, I just couldn't cross the finish line. If that sounds like you, it's totally cool. It actually, I think, is a good thing. It means you care. It means you've got a lot of stuff inside of you that's waiting to come out. You just don't really have a good workflow yet. That was my issue. I was like, I can start something, but I don't know how to finish it. So like, here's how you finish it. I created a free guide. It's just a PDF guide. You could download it, totally free. It's at finishsongsguide.com. And it's just 5 steps that you can take to take a song from scratch all the way to completely finished. And so the kind of one of my favorite ways to use this is if you have a lot of things you've started, you're probably already good with the first step or two. You could plug your demos in, plug your sketches in to like step 3 or something like that, and continue it on to knock out songs and get songs done quicker, because that's the name of the game. How do you find your sound as an artist? You got to commit to creating consistently, being authentic to who you are at the moment, and telling the story that you wanted to tell right here with everything you've experienced up to this point. You got to be able to have a system to flesh all that stuff out in order to get to your sound. A couple songs a year that you, like, not even just releasing, but a couple songs that you just create a year, you're killing yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot. You could do a lot better than that if you had a better workflow. So check that guide out, see if it works for you, apply what works well for you. finishsongsguide.com. I think it'll be a great benefit to you. And hey, we would just love to keep talking further. So just because the episode's over doesn't mean we have to like quit chatting about this fun stuff. So if you want to leave a comment, just letting us know, like a review, just letting us know what you think of the podcast, what you thought of this conversation. It's like an interesting conversation. I'd love to hear what you think as well. So share your thoughts. Also share if there's anything we could expand upon, anything we could clarify or go deeper on. If there's just a specific topic that's bugging you and you'd love a deep dive on it, we'd love to give you a deep dive on it. So don't be shy. Let us know what you think. Let us know how we can help you. And we'll be right back here real soon to continue this awesome stuff in this whole music world together.